Lesson 1, Part 2C, liquid verbs in the future active indicative. There are some verbs whose stems end in what is called a liquid consonant. A liquid consonant is a lambda, rho, mu, or nu. Now, for those of you who have taken phonetics, that's your lateral consonants, your approximant, and your nasals. These are the only consonants in Greek that are laterals, approximants, or nasals. Now, for those of you who may have taken phonology, these are all the sonorants or sonorants, the ones that aren't obstruents, so no stops, no fricatives, all the other consonants right here. Oh, and no affricates either, which sort of fit in with both stops and fricatives. So these four sounds all have somewhat similar characteristics: lambda, rho, mu, and nu. So they are going to act a little bit differently. So if a verb, if the stem ends in lambda, rho, mu, or nu, so it helps you to think of it L, M, N, right, together in the alphabet, and then R, or however you want to remember them. If the stem of a verb ends in one of these, something special is going to happen. When the sigma gets added to any of these consonants, the sigma drops out and the following vowel lengthens. This lengthening of the vowel will either change the vowel to another vowel, change the accent to a circumflex, or both. So we'll either get a different vowel, we'll get a circumflex, or we'll get both another vowel and a circumflex. So observe crino in the present active indicative and in the future active indicative. We've got crino, crines, crine, crinamen, crinete, crinusi. Here we have crino, crines, crine, crinumen, crinete, crinusi. Now, you don't know the rules about accents, and it's not entirely helpful to know them at this point. However, you can make an observation about your accent marks. If you need a second, pause the video and take a good look. What do you observe? Hopefully you observed that in the present active indicative, the accent was a little bit further forward in the word, and in the future active indicative, it was a little further back in the word, on somewhere on the ending. Now, there are some other observations we can make here. Crino, crines, and crine, and crinusi are all 100% identical to the present active indicative, except for the circumflex. Now, again, you haven't been paying attention to accents, and that's fine, but here is where we need to start to pay just a little bit of attention to accents. A general rule of thumb is that a circumflex shows up where something has been omitted, where a letter has dropped out and two letters have come together. Now, I don't want to get into all of the crazy specifics of all of exactly what has happened here, because that's just a little bit beyond where we are right now. You'll learn some rules of contraction about halfway through Greek 2. Technically, what's happening here is called contraction. What I'm concerned about you knowing here is that there should have been a sigma after the nu. Actually, there really should have been an epsilon sigma. The sigma dropped out and the epsilon technically blended in with the ending. Is in all technicality what's happening here. But for our purposes, you can think of it as there was a sigma and the sigma dropped out. And so when a letter drops out, you get a circumflex. General rule we're going to go with for the moment. So we can start to notice circumflexes in verbs. When you see a circumflex, it's going to be important. Now, we've seen lots of circumflexes in our nouns before and probably not paid too much attention to them. Circumflexes are less significant when they show up in nouns because, for example, our genitive ending almost always has a circumflex. Thinking of the genitive singular there. There are quite a few others that just often get a circumflex. So it's a lot less significant because it's what we're sort of used to seeing. In verbs, though, this is going to be extremely significant. If you see a circumflex in a verb, pay close attention. Now, What is different from what we would expect? Hopefully you notice the first person plural and second person plural have a slight difference in the vowel. Okay, we said that either the vowel would lengthen, it would get a circumflex, or both. Omega was already a long vowel. A diphthong was already a long vowel. A diphthong was already a long vowel. A diphthong was already a long vowel. So those couldn't lengthen. Omicron, however, is a short vowel. So is epsilon. They are just by nature of what they are short. Now, technically to lengthen, they should become omega and eta, but they don't here. Instead, they become a diphthong. They are actually following rules of contraction, and which again, you won't learn until I think it's lesson 9. But just suffice it to say, they both become a diphthong, which is long, so they both end up as being long vowels, and there they are, creen umen and creen ate. Already mentioned that. Notice how first person plural and second person plural, the omicron changed to u and the epsilon changed to a. Also note the accents. The only difference for the first singular, second singular, third singular, and third plural are the accents. So pay very close attention to those when you're parsing, pay very close attention to those when you are translating. Circumflex accents often mean that something has dropped out, in this case, a sigma. Now, some verbs, good news, also have a slight change to the stem, which makes it a whole lot easier to tell the difference between the present active indicative and the future active indicative. Often, this will be a letter that has dropped out, normally an iota or a lambda. So if we have balo, one of the lambdas drops out, as well as that sigma. So we get balo, bales, bale, balumen, balete, balusi. So if you'll notice in these 4 that with crino were identical, here they're not identical because the lambda has also dropped out, but everything else is the same except for that circumflex, which has been added with the first plural and second plural. We'll notice that vowel change has still happened. These endings will be the same for all of your liquid verbs. And remember, liquid verbs are verbs whose stems end in lambda, mu, nu, or rho. Your laterals, approximant, and nasals. These are the stems of the liquid verbs we have learned so far. Iro becomes R, and iota drops out. Apokateno becomes apokaten, and iota drops out. Apostello becomes apostel, a lambda drops out. Balo becomes bal, a lambda drops out. Egero becomes eger, and iota drops out. Ekbalo becomes ekbal, a lambda drops out. Crino becomes crin. The only change is the accent, which when you're putting these in for your stems, when I ask you what the stem is, you don't need to worry about putting accent marks on any of those. But just by way of reference here, the accent is going to go on the ending anyway. So just don't worry about that. Just make sure now if you're going to copy and paste to put your answer in, do make sure you get rid of the accent, since these ones technically don't have an accent. Always good to get rid of the accent if you're not sure where the accent is supposed to go in an answer, because writing the answer without the accent is always going to be correct. Now leg, this one's weird, becomes air. Now notice, this is a completely different stem. This is very weird, but it's actually pretty common in languages. What has happened here is way back before the time of Christ, before the New Testament was being written, in an older form of Greek than Koine Greek, there were more than one word for to speak. Now that's not weird. We have more than one word for speak in English. We have speak, we have say, we have talk, which are all just the normal everyday generic form of speak. And then we've got, all kinds of words like pontificate and exclaim and shout. I mean, there's all kinds of different words we have for say, but even with the most generic basic say, speak, and talk, we have 3 different words that are almost 100% identical. In Greek, they had more than one word for this word to speak, but over time, for whatever reason, people just started using one of the forms of the word when they were talking in the present or in the imperfect, and they started using another form of the word when they were talking in the future. And just over time, people tend to speak like the people that they listen to. So over time, as more and more people heard more and more people doing it that way, more and more people started doing it that way. And eventually, no one was using Lego for the second stem, and no one was using air for the first stem. It's just what happened over time. And so it's a little bit easier for us to consider these as being two forms of the same word, whereas technically, if we go back in history far enough, we find that they are separate words, but we can just think of them as the same word. So that's why there's what looks like a completely different word here, air. You're gonna really need to pay close attention to that one, because that one is gonna throw you for a loop the first probably 15, 20, 50 times that you see it. So pay attention to that one. And we got men, and the only change is an accent. So little rule of thumb, if there's an iota as part of a diphthong, ire, ain, then that iota is gonna drop out. If there's a double lambda, one of the lambdas is going to drop out. Lego and air, those are just two separate things. If there's no lambda or no diphthong with an iota, it's going to stay the same. That's the general rule of thumb that we can sort of have in the back of our minds. So summary, a liquid consonant is a lambda, rho, mu, or nu. A verb whose stems end with a liquid consonant will drop the sigma in the future, and the vowel will be lengthened. In the future active indicative, liquids will have a circumflex in all persons and numbers. Most liquid futures will have a slight change in the stem, and memorize the stems.